Good evening. Good evening, Luke. Thank you for joining me. um, hello. My name's Ben, and welcome to Behind the Screens on Boys from the Baltic Star. My occasional look at the history and mechanics and the games that make up the tabletop RPG world and its loosely associated brethren. Hope everyone's well. Many thanks for joining me on this stream, whether live or as VOD, and I hope you find it interesting. And before we get started, the usual housekeeping stuff. So we are Boys from the Baltic Star, and we do Twitch streams of narrative gaming, mostly tabletop RPGs, and adventure video games, typically streaming 4 times a week. We've been doing this for a while now, so ask us anything, but we'll probably know the answer in a few years' time. Stick around until the very end and I'll put up a full schedule card for the upcoming streams. But before I move on, let me say that tomorrow night at this time we'll be streaming our main Traveller campaign. We can be followed at Boys Baltic on Twitter for the latest updates, and we have a Discord community that is welcoming and absolutely wonderful. Seriously, it's filled with kind people sharing their thoughts and creativity, and we don't deserve them. So, what's coming up on this episode of Behind the Screens? Thank you for the Discord link. It's now tradition that I do a brief editorial piece in the front of an episode, so I'm going to keep going doing that, putting my unwanted ore in your virtual suggestion box. And after finally finishing the RPG Adventures from Scratch series last time, I'm going to begin a new series about how to build campaigns from scratch. If you think I already covered that a long time ago, well, you're right, and thank you for watching from the beginning of the series, but this is going to be a practical example, so hopefully it'll provide some useful info. I'm then going to give a brief overview of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer role-playing game and the system on which it's based. Socks! Hello, Ducky. Thank you for joining me. Lovely to have you. And I'm then going to give a practical example of how to add a specific adventure genre to any rule system, following on from last time's sort of theoretical history of the way the systems fit into the picture. And finally, I am going to do a swift rundown of the contents of previous episodes to sort of act as an index, reminder, inspiration, in case people aren't aware of the sort of things I've covered on this stream in the past. So, without further ado, well, that's so kind, Socks, thank you. Imagine, if you can, that you've never played a tabletop RPG. Now, obviously, everyone was in that position at some point in their lives, and plenty of people will never play such a game, so it shouldn't be too hard to imagine that you've never actually dipped your toe in the water. If you were in that position 40 years ago, then the solution was, clearly, to visit a games shop or to spend time with people who played RPGs. Now, back then, almost all RPGs were published items of varying quality, but all were intended to be commercially sold off bookshelves in actual shops. So the people presenting these games were making commercial products with significant numbers of expansions and supplements and enhancements and the like. In essence, this means there was a small but well-resourced selection of game systems, all available from the local shop and all played by the local clubs. And at the time, the most important of these was a game called Dungeons and Dragons, which, believe it or not, has survived to this day in a revised form. There were other games of significant scale, like Traveller and RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu and the like, which have all survived in some form as well. They were all served with multiple books, magazines, miniatures, stories, and, well, you get the picture. So if you were going to your local shop or your local club, you would definitely find people playing D&D, but you would also find people playing these other major games. Now, if we roll the clock forward to today, the world's a very different place. For one thing, the internet has largely killed off the need for physical shops or even physical clubs. I mean, they still exist, but they're no longer essential the way they once were. The internet has also given us a degree of equality for systems that never stood a chance back in the day. Small home-built systems that are never going to find their way to the big bookshops are now available online in electronic form. And print-on-demand services have made it practical to produce printed materials that rival the established systems. And all of this is great, of course, but it has for some reason come with a downside. If you go looking for online RPG content, you tend to find there's now D&D and then everything else. D&D has managed to ride this rocky route extremely successfully and has cemented its position as the largest system. In fact, to my eye at least, it has dramatically increased its dominance. All the other major systems are now much smaller than they were, or much less widely played. It seems that the rise of the truly small game, the one that the internet made possible, has damaged the position of all the major systems except D&D. D&D is everywhere, but now all the other systems exist on a curve between being played by just a handful of enthusiasts and being played by several handfuls of enthusiasts. This is a shame for me, not because of the diminishing scale of the other major systems, but because the one rule set that could easily afford to lose a chunk of its players to the new breed of small game is the one that's done the opposite. If you're a player of RPGs, I hope you'll consider looking into the systems that aren't D&D, and not just those that are new and edgy, but also those that are established with those countless millions of hours of playing and refining and developing the rules to make them as good as they can be. For example, there's that community out there devoted to playing old school rules, which is excellent. Only, and yes, I can always find a downside if I look hard enough, the things they describe as old school are almost invariably classic D&D rules, in some form or other. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I would like to see more old school Cthulhu or RuneQuest or Traveller as well. Of course, you might argue that if I want to see other systems played, then I should be playing them. Why is it any of my business which rules other people use? It isn't. This is the selfish and personal part of behind the screens, so in this bit I'm just wishing out loud. There are a lot of things I've had the opportunity to do thanks to being part of the Boys from the Baltic Star. I've met and become friends with new people and played a range of different things, scenarios and systems. It's all been good, really good, and we've played all sorts of games. In fact, we've played Traveller, Orbital Blues, Fighting Fantasy and Those Dark Places game systems alongside one-shots like Save Dave and Pig at a Wedding. We've played Change Stars and Overgrown with the creators of the games. We've also built on other people's foundations to construct a Halloween horror and espionage story, and just recently, Luke had us punching cultists off a luxury train speeding through the Swiss countryside, a game that's even spawned a waterborne sequel. This isn't even close to being a complete list, you understand. So here's the wish I have. I wish other players got to experience all those things as well. It just means that sometimes, just once in a while, you might need to set the player's handbook off to one side. Anyway, it's how I feel, it's meant fondly, and with all my best wishes. And thank you for listening.